Insert overused horny Jill joke to start the video. That one got overused very quickly. Stand up! Vanguard! Hey Cardfighters, welcome back to the final set review for DBTL1 Genesis of the 5 Great. As the only nation that we haven't talked about yet is of course Brandt Gate. And Brandt Gate is a very interesting nation because not only did it introduce a brand new type of order, it also showed us the very first token-based deck for Overdress. And that said, there's a lot that we need to go over in the cards themselves, as these mechanics are very uniquely tied to cards themselves. Thus, I don't want to spend any more time in the intro, and let's dive straight into the cards so we can get to the business straight away. But before we do that, of course, if you're interested in any of the cards that we're going to talk about in today's video, you can head over to parkage.com to get yourself the new products for Overdress and even products that will come in the future. But if you want to get some extra discount, you can use the discount code TIMELY5 to get 5% off on your entire order. Now, with that part out of the way, let's jump straight into the set review. Of course, just like any other set review, we're gonna start with the triggers, and Brandt Gate also got 8 new triggers, from which 7 are going to get 3 stars, which are the 2 heals, the 2 crits, the 2 fronts, and the heal from the starter deck. However, the heal from the set itself, Cardinal Prima Navirem, is going to get sadly 1 star, as we don't have a need for another heal as we're limited to only running 4. Now, of course, we also need some starters, and we got the starter from the starter deck, which is Aurora Battle Princess Ruby Red, and she got the generic starter skill, which is auto. When this unit is rode upon, if you went second, draw a card. This, just like all the other starters, is going to get 3 stars as just a generic starter. But just like the other nations, they also got another starter from the set, which is Cardinal Fang Povi, and Povi has the same generic starter skill, so I will only give this one 1 star, as it's basically the same card as we just talked about, but then with a different name and a different artwork. Now, another card that's going to be a 1 star is of course their vanilla card, and in their case they got a grade 2 vanilla that is dual combination Julian. And just as I said, it's vanilla, it's a 2 star. There's no real reason to actually play this card. Then we're gonna head over to their PGs, and the first PG that I got is Craggy B's Gear Grant, and Gear Grant is the generic normal PG, so it's going to be 3 stars as it's just nice to have, but it doesn't bring anything new to the table. But what does bring something new to the table is their special PG, which is Violet Dragon, and Violet Dragon has the unique non-discard effect, just like all the other special PGs, which is of course auto. When a unit is put in the Guardian Circle, choose one of your units, and it cannot be hit until the end of battle. If your hand has 2 or more cards, choose a card from your hand and discard it. Just like all the other PGs, gonna be 4 stars. It's a nice card that is a small upgrade from the normal PG, but it won't affect as much as we have with other special PGs. But their over trigger is something that's very special and a hot debate for potentially one of the best over triggers, as we've got Star Dragon, Deity of Infinitude, Eldo Breath. And Eldo Breath's additional effect as an over trigger is double the power and critical of all your front row units until the end of turn. So this is a very unique over trigger that doubles the critical and power of all your front row units. Yes, I already said that, but what it basically means is that in the early game, it's effectively a critical trigger. But the more units you have on the field, the more impactful it's going to be. And if your entire front row is filled, it's basically the same as having Force 2 on all your front row circles, and that's actually a pretty hefty pressure, especially with the doubling of power as well. And interesting enough, if you first drive check a critical trigger and then you drive check this, then it will also double the critical of that critical trigger. So you can suddenly see 4 crits on a unit, which can be your Vanguard if they know guarded your Vanguard. So this is definitely going to be a 5-star over trigger. This card is nice in the early game. It's just an extra critical, so it's not that bad. But in the mid to late game, it scales very nicely as it becomes more and more powerful as the game progresses. And even with future support, this card scales very nicely, because the higher the numbers are going to get, the more powerful this doubling is going to be. And if we're going to get cards with inherent multiple criticals, again, this card is going to be even stronger than normal. So a very nice, powerful over trigger. Now, if we head into the generic support, we first going to look at a grade 1 that we've seen for every single nation, as we have Electrode, Monster, Adepton. And Adepton has the ability auto Regular Circle. When this unit boosts, this unit gets power plus 2k until the end of turn. Now, again, this is a generic 10k booster, but for Brandt Gate, it's going to be only 2 stars, because Brandt Gate Gate has better 10k boosters or 10k boosters that also do something else, or just grade 1s or units that can boost that have just higher power than 10k. And you're gonna see that in this video once we're gonna look at some other grade 1s. And they even have those grade 1s for the specific archetypes in archetypes. So yeah, there's no real reason to actually play this card, so it's gonna be a 2-star for me. Now on top of that, a card that's kind of very underwhelming but looks interesting on paper is this grade 2 Fighting Dragon Gold Dog Dragon. And it has the ability Auto. When this card is discarded from your hand during your turn, if you have a set order in your order zone, cost counterblast 1 and call this card to the graveyard circle. Now I haven't really touched upon set orders in this video just yet, but we're gonna talk about that in a minute. But basically set orders are orders that you place on the field and they stay on the field. The issue that I have with this card is that in the entire nation so far, the only way to activate this skill is with your right line. Meaning you have 1 or 2 windows of opportunity to actually use the skill, and otherwise it's an entire vanilla for the entire game, and even then the payout is kind of marginal. So for me, it's going to be a 1-star. This is basically a worse version of the grade 3 that we saw for Cater Sanctuary, because at least in Cater Sanctuary you could discard it in the late game thanks to Bastion, as its ability allows you to discard. We have none of that here, so sadly 1-star. Now a monster that's actually really good is Detonation Mutant Bulba Mine. And Bulba Mine has the ability Auto Graveyard Circle. At the end of the battle, this unit boosted. If your order zone has a set order, cost, put this unit into your soul and counter charge 1. This is going to be a solid 5-star card. It's a very easy resource tool that is perfect for whatever archetype you might play in Brandt Gate, as you could use both resources quite well. So having this straight off the bat is very nice, because this card will probably be playable for a long while. So this is a very nice card. Now you already got a taste for set orders, so let's talk about one of the 2 archetypes that play with set orders. And we're going to start off with the archetype from the set itself, which is the new Cardinal archetype, or you could say the Orfist deck. But before we talk about the right line, let's first take a look at their set orders themselves. So the first set order that we're going to take a look at is this grade 2 order, which is Halloween Moonlit Night. And the specification of the set order explains after a set order is played, put it into your order zone. So unlike normal orders or normal orders, once you play them, they go to the drop zone. But unlike those, these stay on the board until the end of game. But what does this card actually do? Well, play this with cost Soul Blast 1, Auto. When this card is put into your order zone, draw a card, and continues order zone. If your order zone only has world cards, the following effects are active during the number of cards in your order zone. 1 card, your world become Dark Knight. 2 or more cards, your world become Abyssal Dark Knight. So to explain this a little bit, this set normal order is a world set normal order. There are going to be multiple types of set normal orders, but more important thing is to note here is that this whole mechanic only works with the world type. Now, if you have 1, your game state will become Dark Knight. If you have 2 or more, then the state will turn into Abyssal Dark Knight. What does that do? Well, certain cards in your deck will activate specific abilities according to what type of world you are in that particular instance. So it's just another type of condition you need to meet. But that's not the real thing that we're going to rate about this card. The main thing how we can judge this card is of the first effect, which is basically you draw a card when you use it. And if you just look at that, then basically this is effectively a cycle card, because you Soul Blast 1, remove a card from your hand, and then you draw a card. So it's a Soul Blast cycle, which in my opinion isn't really that great. The only saving grace is that this card somewhat enables the whole mechanic of the Orfist deck, as you need to have the Abyssal Knight and the Abyssal Dark Knight. The issue that I have with this mechanic is that it's unnecessary extra steps you need to go through to even activate certain abilities, and to some extent those abilities are kind of lackluster. So I personally will rate this card only 3 stars. I know that it's hard to rate cards that in themselves are actually a mechanic, because you need to then judge the mechanic as a whole. But in this case, I will judge this card mainly for its cycle effect. And its cycle effect is kind of, it's alright. The extra draw potential that you have in this is nice, because as you can see in the continuous effect, you need to have 2 copies of the order in your order zone to get into the final state, which is Abyssal Dark Knight. So having this cycle effect where you activate 1 and hopefully draw faster into the second is a nice addition, but as a whole the card is kind of it's alright. But it's not the only world order that we got, as we also have a grade 3 version, which is In the Darkness Nobody Knows. This whole order works the exact same thing, the continuous effect is the same, the application is the same. However, the play effect is a bit different, because that part is play this with cost Soul Blast 1. Although, when this card is put into your order zone, choose one of your opponents from the rear guards and retire it. So where the grade 2 order for Soul Blast draws you cards, so it's effectively a cycle, this will then retire one of your opponent's units. For me, this is going to be a 2-star card because this retire effect is kind of whatever. I don't really see any real use for it. It's nice for just some snipe potential if you need to remove a pesky unit that's really annoying. But for your main play, for what the deck wants to do, it doesn't really accelerate your game plan. It doesn't help you to dig deeper towards your second world. Granted, if you already play the 1 order and you can now play this order, you're already done, so you don't need it. But if this is the first world order that you're going to play, then you can ask yourself, is it really something I need? Or is it not something that I need? So it's kind of iffy in my opinion. And the retire, I don't know if retiring for discard in the Soul Blast is good enough on this state of the game. But we all have a different opinion on this one, but for me it's a 2-star. But now that we've seen the world orders, let's take a look at the ride line itself and see the interactions between the world orders and these conditions that we have with Abyssal Dark Knight and Dark Knight itself. So first off, we have the grade 1 of the ride line, which is Cardinal Noid Rodis. And Rodis has the ability, auto, when this unit is placed on the Vanguard circle, search a deck for up to 1 world card, reveal it, put it into your hand and shuffle your deck. So this is a very good effect because now we can just get one of the 2 world orders and already have 1. So we only need to draw into 1 more copy and we're done and we have the entire condition met. So that is already pretty good effect. But then we also have the effect, continuous rearguard circle. During the battle this unit attacked or boosted. If your world is Dark Knight or Abyssal Dark Knight, this unit gets power plus 2k. So this is basically the same as a 10k booster. So another reason why the other 10k booster is kind of whatever. So for me, this is personally going to be a solid 3-star card. Like, it's not the most overpowered card, it's not the most amazing card. The draw or the search effect of the world order is nice, but I don't think it's 4-star worth as a 10k booster. You could use it, but as you're gonna see in a second, that number actually becomes irrelevant quite fast. So that's why I don't really want to give it 4 stars, as you're gonna use for one specific instance and that's it. But more on that later in the video. Now if we go up to the grade 2, we have Cardinal Noid Kubisia. And Kubisia has the effect, auto Vanguard circle, when a world is put into your order zone, choose one of your units and it gets power plus 5k until the end of turn. So this is interesting because the world order that you can search is either grade 2 or grade 3. So you can search it out with the grade 1. Then once you ride up to this grade 2, you can play the grade 2 world order. And then you can immediately give one of your units plus 5k. Which is fine. You can make a 15k attacker, or maybe a grade 1 can turn into a 13k attacker. Or you can make a 23k column if you put the numbers accordingly. So it could make a bit for early pressure. But then also has the ability, continuous rearguard circle, during your turn, if your world is Abyssal Dark Knight, so you have 2 world orders, this unit gets power plus 5k. Now that sounds great, it's a 15k attacker, but inherently this is a bit slower and inconsistent because you first need to get 2 world orders. Yes, you can search one, but you need to draw into the second one to get that. But even in the case when you always get this on your first grade 3 turn, you don't really need this as a 15k attacker, as there's another way to gain access to 15k attackers. Whereas you rather want to keep this card in your hand for shield. So this card is actually being replaced by the core mechanic of the archetype from which this grade 2 belongs, which is kind of awkward. And even its Vanguard circle skill to just gain 1 5k power to the board is kind of whatever. So for me this is going to be a 2-star card. As a right line grade 2, it's kind of underwhelming if I'm gonna be very honest. But then we get to the grade 3, and this is of course the hype card for this nation, or at least for the main grade 3 from the set, as we've got Cardinal Deus Orfist, or better known as Chaos Breaker Descendant, or Chaos Breaker Dragon Returns, or something like that. But its abilities are continuous effect to Vanguard circle. During your turn, if your world is Dark Knight or Abyssal Dark Knight, this unit gets power plus 5k. So it can become an 18k attacker on the Vanguard circle or a Rearguard circle, which is, it's a nice beater. It increases your numbers a little bit. It's free, so that's fine. But then also, act on Vanguard circle. If your world is Abyssal Dark Knight, cost counterblast 2. and call up to 3 Shadow Army tokens to the rearguard circle. Your world changes when you play specific orders. Shadow Armies has power 15k and boost. And this is the reason why the grade 2 as a 15k attacker and the grade 1 as a 10k booster becomes a little bit redundant. Because you can create 15k attacker boosters, so you can create 30k columns if you want to, on demand. Now, for me, this is a card is going to be 4 stars. Some will say 5 stars to some extent, but the reason why I don't want to give this 5 stars is as a Vanguard only gaining 5k, it's kind of mediocre. And creating the tokens is pretty good and pretty strong because it means you can keep your hand, and that means you have way more guard potential than most decks as you don't have to waste calling units to the board. And the tokens that you create are quite beefy as you can create solid 30k columns out of nowhere. But there are some inherent issues that I have with this, as the skill costs 2 counterblast, so your opponent can to some extent damage deny you. We have Bold Mind for the resources, but you still need to pay it upfront to even get those tokens. And another thing that I have with this is that in order to activate the skill, you need to be in Abyssal Dark Knight. So if for some reason you don't have the second world order on your turn 3 place, you start to become a very vanilla. And you need to slam down all your cards to the field to actually do something, which is kind of an issue point. And beyond that, the deck itself feels very vanilla-ish with the tokens and not really doing anything besides it. You do have high numbers, but you are reliant on a weird extra condition, or you need to jump through some extra hoop with this whole world mechanic and these world condition to even get to your place. And the payout for it, it feels not enough to some extent, but as a whole, the deck feels strong enough. So for that that's the main reason why I think this as a boss unit feels like a solid 4-star card. It's pretty good, but I think there's still missed something here. But of course, this isn't everything because we also have some support cards. And if we go over them, we first see a grade 1, which is kind of interesting, which is Useful Recharger. And Useful Recharger has the ability Auto. When its unit is put onto the Guardian Circle, cost counter plus 1. And if your world is Dark Knight, this unit gets shield plus 5k until the end of turn. If it's Abyssal Dark Knight, this unit gets shield plus 10k until the end of turn. So either for 1 counterblast, it's a 10k shield, or a 15k shield. Now this for me is actually a pretty good card, and I will give it 3 stars because this synergizes with the playstyle of Orfist, because seeing as you can create tokens that are 15k boosters, you don't really need to call down a lot of cards from your hand, so might as well play cards that have inherent higher shield value. And this is kind of flexible with either being 10k or 15k shield. Yes, it costs a counterblast, which is a bit annoying, but even then, I think it's still a solid card, and therefore it's a good 3-star card. It could have been better if it was sold less, but sadly that's not the case. Now another card for the world deck is this grade 2 Vrichin Mutant Rumbler, and it has the ability Auto. When its unit is placed on the rearguard circle, if your world is Abyssal Dark Knight, cost counter plus 1 and soul plus 1 and draw a card. Now for me, this is going to be a 2-star card. As a draw engine, it's a bit overcosted, counter plus soul plus, which already makes it not great. But on top of that, it has the condition that you need to have 2 world orders. Usually you want to draw as early on so you can draw into those orders. In this case, you draw afterwards. Yes, you draw them for more shield value, but is that a good enough reason to play the card? Honestly, I don't think that's the case. Maybe you run it now because we don't have enough options otherwise, but once the deck got more cards to play with, I think this card's going to get replaced ASAP. Now another card that's actually very interesting, and it's also the final support card for Orfist, is this grade 3 Electricity Plunder Monster Jabatel. And Jabatel has the ability continues a rearguard circle. If your world is Abyssal Dark Knight, when this unit would attack, it battles all of your opponent's units in a column. So it's a column attacker. This is pretty unique because we don't see this as often in Vanguard, and this is a nice pressure tool against your opponent, even with the tokens, because that's a 28k column. It's a good magic number. And when you attack the Vanguard, you also attack the booster behind it. So you still pressure rearguards while also attacking the Vanguard. And in the case you cannot hit their Vanguard because of a defensive trigger or something, you can just attack into a column and pressure 2 potential cards from your opponent at the same time. And even when they guard, they probably won't guard for both cards. So just in raw value, this card can always destroy 2 cards or maybe even more on the field, because if your opponent wants to protect both cards, they need to at least call down 2 Guardians because they need to guard separately for both units. So overall, this is actually a pretty decent card, and I will give it 3-star rating. The only issue, of course, that it has is that it has the Abyssal Dark Knight condition, but even then, I think there's actually pretty decent value behind this card. And that rounds up the first archetype for Brandt Gate. So let's take a look at the second archetype that was introduced in the starter deck, which is the Imprisoned Battle Princess deck. But before we can go over the right line, just like the Abyssal Dark Knight deck or the Orfist deck, let's first take a look at their special set order, which in their case isn't a world card, but a prison card. And that is this grade 1 card, Galaxy Centaur Prison Galactolus. And Galactolus has the effect, cost, rest one of your units to play this card. Although, when this card is put into your order zone, soul charge free. And it has the continuous effect, order zone. When your opponent can normal call a rearguard, they can perform the following. Soul Blast 1, if you do so, they choose one of their imprisoned cards and call it to the rearguard circle. Or Counterblast 1, if they do so, they choose 2 of their imprisoned cards and call them to the rearguard circle. So this is somewhat of a bite mechanic that allows your opponent to get their cards back. Your whole deck is around removing their cards and putting it in your prison, and then your opponent can potentially pay the Counterblast or pay the Soul Blast to get them out of the prison and get them back onto the field. And this is basically how the whole archetype will function around this particular card, as seen as this is the only prison they have as of yet. Now, this is a very hard card to rate, because the soul that you generate is fine because you use soul to bound or to imprison their card, but I would personally say it's a solid 4-star card, and the reason is that unlike the World Order, this actually facilitates an entire mechanic, as the prison mechanic is a control mechanic that interacts directly with this order, whereas the World Orders are more like a condition you need to meet. It's less of an actual mechanic that you activate with those cards. I am aware that this as a control mechanic is kind of underwhelming, lackluster at the moment, because as you're going to see when we talk about the card, every single card that imprison one of your units has the same cost as your opponent can use to get them free. So you basically are trading resources. And depending on the opponent, this will either favor them or favor you. Now, I don't really want to go in depth about that particular aspect by rating it for that, because it's a whole can of worms to go over. I currently will rate it at 4 stars because it's the only way to activate this mechanic, and the soul charge is fine for what it has. But I can definitely see other prison cards being introduced that will be a better implementation of this particular card, but we have to wait and see until future sport. Or we get imprisoned cards that can imprison our opponent's cards for much cheaper, thus we gain more value in the long run than our opponent. And I think that should be the direction they should go in the future. So now that you've seen the imprison card, let's go over the right line and then into the actual support for the prison mechanic. So first off, we have the grade 1, which is Aurora Battle Princess Kyanite Blue. And Kyanite Blue has the effect, although when this unit is placed on the Vanguard circle, search your deck for up to 1 prison card, reveal it, put it into your hand, and shuffle your deck. So this exact same skill as the grade 1 from the World Order deck, only instead of the World card, you search up the prison card. So it's a nice, good effect to kickstart your mechanic. And in this case, I think this is way more important because all your cards need to have the imprison card to even do something, whereas the World Order cards, you can just play them and they potentially will activate even better skills once you play more World Orders. But on top of that, this is also a pretty decent rearguard unit because it has the effect, although when this unit is placed on the rearguard circle, if one or more of your opponent's cards are imprisoned in your prison, cost counter +1 and soul +1 and draw a card. So it's another way to draw some cards. It's a bit overcosted, but if you need it, you can get your draw potential. Now for me, this is going to be a 4-star card because as I said, it's a bit better than the grade 1 for the Orfist deck, if I'm going to be very honest, but it all depends on your stance which one will have more impact. But seeing this whole imprison mechanic revolves around the prison itself, you really need that card, otherwise the entire deck won't do anything at all. So that's why I think it's at least a 4-star. But then if we go over to the grade 2, we see Aurora Battle Princess Risat Pink. And Risat Pink has the ability, although when this unit is placed on the Vanguard circle, your opponent chooses a card from their hand and imprison it in your prison. So this takes a card from your opponent's hand, which is nice, but it's kind of a risky thing that will probably backfire in a lot of cases, because they can just imprison a powerful card with an on-place effect and they can get it back next turn as if nothing happened. Or they can maybe imprison a grade 3, and once they ride up to grade 2, if you went first, they can superior call that grade 3 onto the rearguard circle, and they suddenly have a grade 3 a turn earlier, which is kind of dangerous to think about. So you might potentially help your opponent more, then you help yourself in this. And then on top of that, it has the skill continuous rearguard circle. If one or more of your opponent's cards are imprisoned in your prison, this unit gets power plus 2k. So 12k attacker, which you're never going to use in the rearguard circle, so it's kind of underwhelming. So you're only going to play this as a Vanguard unit. But as I said, the Vanguard skill might or might not actually help you. So personally, I think it's a 2-star card, because if at the very least you could imprison it for the entire game, that specific card, you would actually get value out of it. But currently, that's not the case. So it's kind of iffy right now, if I'm gonna be very honest on this one. And now we have the main grade 3 of this deck, which is of course Aurora Battle Princess Seraph Snow. And Seraph Snow has the effect, continuous Vanguard Circle. During your turn, if one or more of your opponent's cards are imprisoned in your prison, this unit gets power plus 10k, so it can become a 23k attacker, which is nice. But as a second part, it has, and if 3 or more cards are imprisoned, this unit gets drive plus 1. So it can be a 23k attacker, and it can also be a 23k attacker triple drive, which is nice value. But it sometimes can be tricky to imprison 3 cards depending if your opponent is playing around you and not calling enough cards to the field. And keep in mind, every single turn they can just keep freeing their prison cards, so you need to be a bit careful on this one. But then it also has the ability, act on Vanguard rearguard circle, once a turn, cost counterblast 1, choose 2 of your opponent's rearguards and imprison them in your prison. This is what I meant with that you're trading resources, because you can imprison 2 cards for 1 counterblast, but they can get 2 cards out of your prison for a counterblast. So you're not really advancing the game stage here, as you're just trading counterblasts at this current stage. So that's kind of annoying. Yes, it's great that you have 1 skill that can imprison 2, but you are very dependent on what your opponent's going to do in order to activate either the power or the extra drive check. Now, granted, in most cases, you will get the 10k power. The triple drive is not always active, and at the same time, you need to be careful, because the triple drive can actually backfire on you, because as you're going to see, you don't really pressure your opponent as much as other decks, so they can easily stop your attacks turn after turn, and if you keep triple driving every single turn, you will start to go through deck out without pressuring your opponent to 6 damage. So it's kind of iffy in certain situations, and with the current environment in mind, I can only give this card 4 stars, because this card has the same issues to some extent as Eugene, because as a boss unit, it doesn't really push as hard. It's definitely a bit better than Eugene because of the triple drive and the easier to attain 10k power, and it has a better control effect, as it just can snipe 2 cards every single turn, and you can call to the rearguard circle, which is a nice addition, because that means you could use her as a rearguard unit in the future and then get a better Vanguard unit at some point. But as a actual mainstay boss unit, she leaves certain things to be desired at the current stage. She might get better with more support around her, but currently that's sadly not the case, and it's hard to see that actually getting there where she doesn't need to be power crept. But with that said, let's dive into the support around the imprison mechanic, and we start off with an interesting grade 1, which is automatic caution. And automatic caution has the ability to continuous rearguard the guardian circle. If 1 or more of your opponent's cards are imprisoned in your prison, this unit gets power plus 2k and shield plus 5k. Again, a 10k booster, which replaces the generic 10k booster. But this also can be a 10k shield unit. And because of the flexibility, I think it's a solid 3-star card. Like, this is a nice extra shield option to stall a bit, but at the same time it makes good numbers as a 10k booster behind your Vanguard, for example, or maybe on your side columns as well. We also have a grade 2, which helps us with more imprison cards, as we have this card, Security Patroller, as this has the effect auto. When this unit is placed in the rearguard circle, costs Soul Blast 1, choose 1 of your opponent's rearguards and imprison it in your prison. Now, Soul Blast 1 for prison, again, you start to trade with resources, as they can get it out for the same cost. And as a unit with an unplayed Soul Blast 1 to imprison card, it's kind of redundant already, because we have other cards that do the same thing for the same cost and even have more on top of it. Yes, this card can also target back row units, and those other cards that we're going to talk about in a second can't. But for that, you have the Vanguard that can just counterblast 1 to grab 2 back row units. So this card, for me, feels more like a 2-star card, as it's kind of useless at this current stage. You might want to play it just for the option to imprison the back row, but even then I don't really see the point of that, if I'm gonna be very honest. Now, on grade 2, which is actually pretty nice to have, is Grapple External, and this is generic 15k attacker, as it has the skill continuous rearguard circle. During a battle, this unit attacks if an opponent's card is imprisoned in your prison. This unit gets power plus 5k, so it's 15k, 23k with an 8k, which is fine. For me, it's going to be a solid 3-star card. Like, it helps to be a bit more aggressive. but it's nothing really besides that. Now another card for a bit more pressure is this grade 3 Alert Guard Gunner, and this has the effect Auto Rearguard Circle. When this unit attack hits a Vanguard, choose up to 2 of your opponent's rearguards and imprison them in your prison. Now it sounds great to imprison 2 cards for free, but it's going to be a 1-star, and the reason for it is that it has an on-hit on the Vanguard, and it's a 13k attack, and as we already said, it's hard to create high numbers in this build, so you cannot really put a lot of emphasis on this on-hit effect to pressure a lot of shield. It's going to be guarded with probably 1 card in most instances, and even if you Persona right, sure, it's going to be 2 cards, but how many times they're going to Persona right where this card will actually matter. So that's why it's going to be a 1-star, as this probably won't actually see play, as it's sadly not in the right build. Now, another grade 3, which is actually kind of useful, is Grana Road Fair Tiger, and Fair Tiger has the ability Act on the Rearguard Circle once a turn, cost Soul Blast 1, and this unit gets power plus 2k until the end of turn. Choose one of your opponent's front row rearguards and imprison it in your prison. Now this is again going to be a solid 3-star card. Like, it's a 15k attacker with the imprison mechanic built into it, and it's not on an unplace effect, so you can use this turn after turn after turn. Now you might think to yourself, why isn't this a 4-star card? Because it's actually a bit better than a 15k attacker. Well, the reason for it is that A, it's not a grade 2, so you cannot potentially intercept with it, and 2, to even get access to the 15k attacker, you need to be able to pay the Soul Blast. So at some point, you might run out of soul, and then it's going to be a vanilla 13k. So it's an alright card, but it's not groundbreaking. It's solid, so therefore it's going to be a 3-star card in my book. Now, on top of that, another card which is really good is Hyperspeed Robo Chelva Stud, and Chelva Stud has the ability Act on Rearguard Circle once a turn, cost Counter plus 1 and Soul plus 1. Choose one of your opponent's rearguards and imprison it in your prison. Then, if 3 or more of your opponent's cards are imprisoned in your prison, you draw a card. Again, an act ability where we can keep imprisoning our opponent's cards, but at the same time, it's also a draw engine. And you might think to yourself, gaining the draw might be a bit tricky to have 3 cards in your prison, but keep in mind, the Vanguard already imprisons 2, so if your opponent has 3 units onto the field, you will activate this for the draw, 100%. As long as you have 2 counterblasts, you can do that, and you probably will save this card for always getting the draw, because if you only use this to get the imprison effect, it's not that great. You really want to get the draw as well. So you need to be careful with this one, but if you play it correctly, it's a solid 4-star card because the draw engine is always great, and it's also another imprison on top of it. I think that's going to be the thing moving forward, is either get cheaper way to imprison your opponent's cards, or get effects that imprison and do something else to gain more effect on top of it. Hopefully a bit more pressure in the long run, but a draw is still nice to have. Now, another card which is really nice and a good powerful value card is the Triple R Grade 2, which is Aurora Battle Princess Argara Rouge. And Argara Rouge has the effect Continuous Rearguard Circle and Guardian Circle. If 2 or more of your opponent's cards are imprisoned in your prison, this unit gets power plus 5k and shield plus 10k. So it's a 15k attacker that's also a 15k interceptor or shield in your hand. That's great. The only thing is that you need to have 2 in your prison. Sure, during your turn, you will get that. But during your opponent's turn, maybe not so much, as they can play around this, as this is much easier to shut down or shut off, unlike the grade 1 that only needs 1 for the 5k shield. So it's kind of iffy, but it's a nice card in just raw stats. And on top of that, she also has the effect Although, when the unit is placed on the rearguard circle, cost Soul Blast 1, choose one of your opponent's front row rearguards and imprison it in your prison. So this is yet another card that basically power creeps the grade 2 Patroller, as it does the same for the same cost. Sure, it can only hit front row, but at the same time she can be a 15k attacker and 15k shield. So this is a lot more versatile. But at the same time, I will only give this card 4 stars, because I think you mainly should look at it as a 15k attacker, and sometimes it's a 15k shield, and you will be able to imprison one for Soul Blast 1, but that's the status quo. So therefore, everything considered, I think it's a solid 4-star card. 5 stars, in my honest opinion, is stretching it a bit too much. So as it's not a completely main staple, you need to run it. Sure, right now in the current card pool, but if we get one more wave of support, I think you definitely can get away with not running it, as long as we get some decent support in the next support wave. And that's also the final unit card, but we also have 2 order cards to go over. 1 normal order, 1 blitz order, and we're gonna first talk about the normal order, which is this grade 2, called Causality Goes Crazy as I Will It. And its effect is play this with cost Soul Blast 1, choose one of your Vanguards, and it gets power plus 10k until the end of turn. So this is going to be a 2-star, because you discard a card and soul this one for 10k power on your Vanguard. It's not the greatest of value. Sure, it's not the counterblast, but again, you are discarding a card to play an order, which just so far, it's not really worth it, as we don't really see any skills as of yet that capitalize on this. There's no guard restrict, there's no inherent critical, there's no unhit or something. So yeah, it's gonna be a 2-star. And then finally, the Blitz order that we've got. Psych, it's not a 15k shield, it's a 30k shield, as we have Lightning Barrier, Emergency Deployment, and its ability is play this with cost, Counterblast 2, choose one of your Vanguards, and it gets power plus 30k until the end of the battle. Yeah, this is going to be a 1-star because it's Counterblast 2, so it's easier to play around. And unlike the Counterblast 2 Blitz order that we got for Stoicheia that can potentially negate a damage, this is 30k shield. It's a lot of shield, yes, but it's not Counterblast 2 worth, because we have 15k shields that's for free, so we're paying 2 Counterblasts to get 15k extra. That's how you could look at it, because other nations get 15k without paying a Counterblast. If you look at it like that, in no way, shape, or form is that worth the Counterblast. No way. So for me, it's going to be a 1-star. Maybe you're going to run it just as a tech option or something, but even then, it's kind of whatever. And because it costs 2 Counterblasts, your opponent can even play around it and attack you first with the high numbers, and then leave it with a low number where they waste this card if they need to use it, and you basically are then negating the amount of value you could generate out of it. There are counterplay abilities to this card, which doesn't really put this card even in a favorable position. So that's why it's a 1-star for me. And that also concludes everything for this set review for Brandt Gate. Brandt Gate is a very interesting nation because the entire nation revolves around a new type of order card, and it itself is a new mechanic, which is the set orders. And because order cards aren't actually cards themselves, as you lose them from the hand, they aren't units on the board, judging them for something that forces them to either be on the field and then a mechanic revolves around them is pretty weird, as that isn't really how we judge cards normally in Vanguard. So you might or might not agree with the ratings that I gave to the World Order and Prison Order. That's completely fine. Like, it's arbitrary to some extent. You could also just say you cannot rate those cards, as they are a mechanic in itself, and you should then just rate the mechanic itself. And if we're gonna go that route, I don't like the World Order mechanic. I just think it's a stupid extra condition that you need to jump through. It's extra hoops. It's basically Thunderstrike for Narukami during the GR. It doesn't fulfill anything than just making your cards more awkward to work with. Whereas the Imprisonment mechanic actually is a control aspect. However, the implementation of it is kind of underwhelming, but I can see definitely future potential to it, and it opens up a very interesting dynamic as a control aspect where your opponent can interact with it. But it all comes down to future support and how they're gonna evolve these new types of set orders, and who knows? We might see new set orders. But with that said, let me know in the comments down below what you guys think of Orfist, as well as the new Battle Princess archetype. Do you have a favorite among them? Do you think they are pretty amazing, or were you hoping for something else? Let me know all your thoughts in the comments section down below. As always, this video has been brought to you by our lovely patrons over at patreon.com/VanguardInsider. You guys are amazing. If you want to support the channel or everything that's happening on the channel, you can go to patreon.com/VanguardInsider and become a Patreon today. But with that said, I'm Mr. Time Leap. See you guys in the next one!